Known as the Herbalist of White Orchard, Tomira was one of the first characters you are introduced to in The Witcher 3. As a herbalist living just outside of a small village in eastern Tomira, Tomira was of great importance to the local peasants and travelers. She was the only one that knew how to help people with their sickness, and which herbs to give them so they would be relieved of their pain. But Tomira herself wasn't from this village. She came from somewhere else, which makes living in a town like White Orchard kind of unusual. Tomira presumably came from somewhere within the kingdom of Tomira. When she had reached the age of 18, Tomira started her studies at the Temple of Mlethle in Elander. Here she studied under Mother Nenneke along with several other novices, so she could eventually become a healer. But there were some unforeseen distractions at the temple. At the time when Tomira studied there was a boy named Koslav that every female novice at the temple seemed to fall in love with. It didn't help that he never wore a shirt while working near the temple, which resulted in many of the novices not being able to keep their eyes off him. This also included Tomira. She, however, went a bit further than the rest at the temple, as she decided to leave the Temple of Mlethle for this Koslav. They spent one summer together, before the boy named Koslav suddenly left her. It wouldn't take long before she would start to regret everything. Tomira tried to get her old life back at the temple, but Nenneke refused to take her back due to her strict rules on relationships. Seeing no other option, Tomira returned to her parents, but they wanted to have nothing to do with her, possibly because of her actions at the temple, as they could be seen as disgraceful, as well as they might have been just disappointed with her. They gave her a small coin pouch and a travel cloak, and sent her on her way. For a while, Tomira traveled the roads, looking for a new home, which she would eventually find in White Orchard. She presumably didn't go to White Orchard directly, as it would have just taken her a few days maybe to walk from Elander to White Orchard, which wouldn't be much of a long struggle. After arriving in White Orchard, it took some time for Tomira to get adjusted to her new life. She wasn't really close or had friends with anyone in the village, except for one person, a woman named Claire. They presumably met not long after Tomira arrived. However, their friendship wouldn't have much longevity to it. Claire's husband, Volker, would get into a fight with the local ruler of the village and decided to just take his family into the woods and to start a village free of the cruel ruler of White Orchard. After Claire left the village, she and Tomira never really met again, as within 2 weeks of her departure, she and her husband would be killed by the Lord of White Orchard. Over the next 2 decades, Tomira lived a kind of somber and lonely life in White Orchard. Her only friend was dead, and the Second Northern War almost reached her small town. The Third War, however, would hit harder, as this time she couldn't escape the conflict, as just outside of the village of White Orchard, a large-scale battle between Temeria and Nilfgaard was fought, resulting in Nilfgaard taking control over White Orchard. But the influx of wounded men wasn't the only problem that she faced. The river became polluted, and the water was no longer safe to drink, making it harder for her to help cure people with her herbs. And top it all off, a griffin made its nest near the town, terrorizing the local peasants and injuring a woman named Lina, who made the unwise choice to meet her lover in the woods. She would soon after meet a white-haired witcher, who was on the hunt to slay the griffin. Little did she know how much influence this witcher would have on her life. Tomira's life under Nilfgaardian rule went just fine, almost like how everything was before the war. However, if at the end of Witcher 3, Tomira falls under the rule of Redania, her fate is less than optimal, as Redania actively hunted down all mages, alchemists and herbalists, which of course includes Tomira. Witch hunters would visit her hut, burn it down and tie her to a stake. As the witch hunters said their words, the same white-haired witcher once again arrived in White Orchard. Geralt could save her from the fire, and Tomira would be able to start her life anew somewhere else where the witch hunters wouldn't get to her, presumably further south in Nilfgaard. So you may wonder, how old is Tomira? And was she at the Temple of Elander when Geralt was there at some point? Presumably, Tomira started her studies at the Temple of Elander a few years after Geralt stayed there for a while when he was healing from his fight with the Striga. But it also has to have been before the year 1250 due to some notes that we can find in The Witcher 3 which state that Claire died in 1250. So if we take a look at the youngest possible age of Tomira, then we would have to assume that she was about 18 to 19 years old when she arrived in White Orchard, and would only have been friends with Claire for a few months before her death. If this is the case, then Tomira's age would be equal to 19 plus 22 years for the time she spent between her friend's death and The Witcher 3 when it takes place, meaning that she's about 41 years old in The Witcher 3. Which, to be fair, I think is something most people do not expect when they see her for the first time. But you have to keep in mind that this 41 is the lower estimate when it comes to her age. So overall, to give it a bit of range, I would say that she is somewhere in between 41 and 45 years old. Also something I want to quickly mention is that according to leaked material, Tomira and Claire at first were supposed to be twin sisters, before they eventually were rewritten to be friends. But, age aside, what do you think of Tomira? Did she make an impression on you with her first appearance in The Witcher 3? Till the next video. Bye.